question from Dade. Did Harold really die at Hastings? Answer to that is that at the moment, with the available evidence that is there for people to see, we have to say that yes, Harold died at Hastings. Only, I think, one source says that he didn't, and until some sort of archaeological evidence can be produced to cast doubt on all of the other sources, we are left at the moment with the fact that he must have died there. Getting towards the end of the questions now, we have this from Jade, who asks, what changes did the Norman conquest bring about in society? So, good question there. Well, first of all, pretty much all of the land that had belonged to those who had fought and had been killed at Hastings was forfeit to the crown. Those who surrendered would have been given the chance to buy it back from the king and sort of start the whole feudal model in England. But many of the remaining old aristocracy were displaced by two heavy taxes which came in very fast after William was crowned. In terms of religion, England strengthened its ties to Rome and the Vatican, coming in much more in line with mainstream church politics, because obviously the Normans appointed many of their own men into high church posts, and by a certain point, not too long, maybe a decade or so after the conquest, most of the old English clergymen no longer held high offices in the land. Of course, that is a product of the fact that now the aristocracy was essentially foreign. French became the language of the rich and powerful. The fashions of the Normans pretty much wiped away those of the old order, and it all came as a very big shock. Militarily and socially, chevaliers or knights became the new basic ruling class. Architecturally, a more robust sort of building scheme came into effect. Muscular looking churches with these great towering Romanesque arches in them, which replaced pretty much the old Saxon chapels, which were much more decorative. Yes, some of this has already been put into motion by Edward the Confessor, who was very Normanized by his time on the continent, and he started a modern building program in England. But over 90 castles were also built across the country to, of course, control it, and these changed the face and look of England. But though it brought about incredible changes in the culture of the land and the society of the people, by 1100 you see things starting to begin to mesh together more. In architecture, those big Romanesque columns are becoming decorated with old Saxon motifs, and the shift is basically slowly becoming more feudalized, and more English again. So at first everything changes pretty much, and then slowly it calms down and melds together. Excellent stuff. So our next question follows on the theme of what happened next. What happened to the ordinary English afterwards? What happened there is they had to endure a period of brutal and savage medieval warfare. A chronicler wrote that he thought it was shameful that foreigners should grow rich from England's wealth while her sons were slain or sent to wander the earth aimlessly. It was a time of great instability, and for the ordinary Saxons it was a very terrifying time because they didn't have anybody they could go to. Yes, you could go to the Normans if you had a problem, but the laws were changing though, and the way you addressed your problems were changing. And the problem is, because the Normans didn't have a vested interest in the land yet, they had no particular reason to do you any favours. But despite the great amount of atrocities and the trauma that everybody went through, by 1100 again, what happens is that the population of England actually has recovered from an estimated 1.5 million. The population has risen to 2 million, being run by about 25,000–26,000 Normans, who are increasingly seeing themselves not as Normans but as English. And by the time of Henry II, it would be very much the fact that they were integrating themselves with England and separating themselves from France. But at the time, for those people, it was the most traumatic, cataclysmic disaster that had ever happened to England, because it seemed as if England was no more. It seemed as if everything had gone, everything was over. They'd been conquered, their kings were gone, their lords were gone, family members were gone, people were in exile, people were in exile in Scotland, Ireland, probably even some of them fleeing to distant parts of Europe. And for the people at the time, it was just the worst thing that had ever happened. It was apocalyptic. It would take decades for things to return to a level that people could see that England was still there. But of course eventually it did, and it's that Englishness that we're left with. It's that legacy of both Saxon and Norman that came together after the traumatic years of warfare and conquest that forged the English nation, which would eventually become part of the British nation. Okay, and so we reach the end of our question and answer journey.